I used to be a spy. I know how this works.
You were saying it's literally on the scale of trillions of dollars.
There's a lot going on here that we don't know about.
Tell me how you got a special focus on China.
The CCP is the most murderous organization in human history.
The organ trade.
Some of these organs are forcibly removed from people while they're still alive. You don't realize how cruel some people can be.
When you were in Rome, was that having to do with the Italian mob?
You've probably heard about Judge Falcone, the guy that was blown up by the mob.
This is something that just perplexes me.
I testified to Congress dealing with transnational crime, money laundering, even China.
I'm joined today by John Cassara, a former CIA and Treasury officer for over 25 years. He's testified before Congress many times as an expert on transnational crime, terror finance, and money laundering, and he's here today to discuss with us how China is advancing their global agenda here in the U.S. right under our noses. John, thanks for joining me. I've really been enjoying reading your book. To get started, give us a little bit of background on your life and career.
I actually was born and raised in Southern California. And in 1978, I was recruited by the agency, drove across country, reported to work in Langley, thought I was going to be the next James Bond. But in fact, they put me down in the library and I was an analyst, which, I learned one of the first laws of the bureaucracy: keep your mouth shut and your eyes and ears open. I found out about the clandestine program they had, and I was fortunate to be accepted to that. So I became a case officer for the Central Intelligence Agency during the height of the Cold War. I basically learned how to spot, assess, develop, and recruit spies, foreign reporting agents, and write it up and send it into headquarters for policymakers to make their decisions. I went overseas, my first tour. I absolutely loved it, fell in love with the job. Great adventure, good times. It was fantastic, but I also happened to fall in love with a young lady. And at that time, it was prohibited to marry foreign nationals. So I had to choose between the woman I loved and the job I loved. I chose Christina, and it's a good thing I did because we've been married for 42 years, 3 kids and 7 grandkids. Okay. So it all worked out in the end.
You started with CIA, and I just wanted to make sure I had the agencies correctly. So it was CIA, Customs, and Treasury, right?
That's correct. Once I left the agency, I shot my basically my application to government agencies and departments, primarily in the law enforcement field. And I was picked up by the Secret Service first. I did that for about 3-4 years. I was a special agent assigned to the Washington, D.C. field office, did a lot of protection, a lot of great times, a lot of adventures. Again, this was during the Reagan administration. But I realized that I did not want to do that for the rest of my career. It looks very glamorous from the outside, but from the inside, I just didn't want to stand post, stand guard. They used and abused you for protection details, and I have the utmost respect for those that did it, but it wasn't for me. So I transferred over to the Customs Service. Again, special agent, criminal investigator. Customs at that time enforce more laws than the FBI does. Everything dealing with the border. And one of my first assignments with Customs, I was an undercover arms dealer for a couple of years, drawing on my CIA background. Very successful case. And then I volunteered to go back overseas to our office in Rome, Italy. It's signed to the embassy out there, combated Italian-American organized crime by looking at the illicit flow of money going back and forth. Headed up the world's first truly organized money laundering task force, and did that for about 6 years. We were also a regional office. I traveled a lot around the Middle East and sub-Saharan Africa. Really fascinating stuff. Came back and I was assigned as a customs liaison to Treasury's FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, working very closely with financial intelligence and how to help law enforcement make cases by following the money and the value trails. Right after 9/11, I had some severe differences with FinCEN management about how to combat terror finance, because I saw what our adversaries were doing in the Middle East. And long story, let's just say we disagreed. So I exiled myself over to the State Department, Bureau of International Narcotics, Law Enforcement Affairs. We did a lot of training and technical assistance to countries around the world at the time that were interested in combating money laundering and threat finance. And then I retired out of Maine Treasury, their Office of Terrorism Financial Intelligence.
So you've been all over the place. You know exactly how criminal organization works, it sounds like.
Well, they change over time, but let's just say I've had a healthy exposure both to intel and law enforcement.
And I'm curious, with all those things that you've done, what was your favorite place to work and favorite assignment that you ever were assigned?
I love the agency, I really did. But I think the most fun I ever had was just being a special agent, criminal investigator assigned to our embassy in Rome and going overseas and working cases. As I had no supervisory uh, requirements on me, I was just basically a hump agent, a hump investigator, but I got to do fascinating things. I did so much in the Middle East long before 9/11, you know, following the money and the value trails, making cases, making sources, learning how things work, working the streets, um, and just had so many adventures. I could write some books about it. In fact, I have, but just really, really fascinating times.
I'm really curious as you're talking about this, has it become more easy or more difficult to trace laundering schemes with today's technology versus then? Would you say it's easier or harder?
It's probably harder, and we could talk for a long time about this issue as well. My background, the years that I did it in the 80s, the 90s, first parts of the 2000s, 2010 to the present, basically focusing on old-fashioned ways of moving money through banks, financial institutions, bulk cash smuggling, and trade-based money laundering, which is one of my fields of particular interest. That still represents by far and away the vast majority of money laundered around the world. I'd say 95% plus. But today, there's so much more going on with cyber, cryptocurrencies of all sorts, this type of thing. It's becoming more and more important. All I can say, Luke, is I'm glad I had my career when I did.
Yeah.
I would be hard pressed to do some of that stuff today.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get into the trade based money laundering. I was reading the whole chapter in your book practically about that. But tell me how you got a special focus on China. You wrote now a whole book on it. You've got in some of your other books sections on that. What is it about China that piqued your interest, and why did you start looking into it?
Well, over the decades, I've looked at a variety of threats, and we can talk about that as well. But what really kicked me off about China was during my travels, primarily to the developing world, places like South Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and whatnot. And I saw this growing Chinese presence, circa 2012 to the presence, and they were basically exploiting those countries. They were taking advantage of them in so many different ways, and it really upset me. It set me on an official level, if you will, but mostly on a personal level. It was just not right what they were doing, and the countries, particularly in the developed world, didn't have the insight, didn't have the expertise, didn't have the capacity, if you will, to fight back. And they were going in there and basically taking advantage of them, stripping them of their national resources and this type of thing, and all the money, if you will, was going back to China. Very little was left in country. They were exploiting them like true imperialists or capitalists. And then it kept going and going and going. There was a paper that was written about 2018 about the largest categories of transnational crime, and they listed these off, and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, and you know who leads in all those categories? It's China. And so that really set me off. So then I started doing some research, and I just decided I wanted to write about it and just basically try to get people to wake up and pay attention to the Chinese money laundering.
And you said China is by far, I don't even think a close second, the biggest launderer in the world of any nation. Is that right?
Yes. just to put things in context, we don't know how much money is laundered globally every year because by its very nature, it's hidden, it's opaque, very, very difficult to trace it. However, we use a rough estimate put out by the IMF a number of years ago. They're guessing, calculating, roughly 3 to 5% of world GDP is the proceeds of crime and laundered money, which in very rough numbers, what I use is about $4 trillion a year. So then what I did, Luke, when I wrote my book, I looked at the top 12 categories of transnational crime, things like counterfeit goods and narcotics, IPR theft, human trafficking, forced labor, wildlife trafficking, illegal logging, illegal fishing, illicit tobacco, trade fraud, organ harvesting, even corruption. And in almost all of these categories, China leads the world. I mean, it is not even close. There's not even a close second. China leads the world. And then, as much as possible with the information available, I put together the numbers. For example, pick one of the largest is counterfeiting, well over $1 trillion a year. In fact, the estimates recently even go higher than that. China's responsible for about 90% of the counterfeiting in the world. Right there, you're talking $900 billion. All of that is illicit, illegal proceeds. All of that has to be laundered. So if you look at calculating money laundering by looking at China's involvement in what we call specified unlawful activities or predicate offenses, you got an easy $2 trillion a year. And that's roughly half of the IMF's $4 trillion a year. So I make the argument that looking at Chinese transnational crime and money laundering, China is by far the worst culprit in the world and is responsible for about half the money laundering in the world.
I told you the reason I reached out to you, I mean, this is somewhat news to me as of recently, but I'm working over in these LA fire zones, and all these people are suddenly listing their homes because they can't get building permits. It's a total headache to try and rebuild your home after you're dealing with an insurance and the government bureaucracy. It's a total shit show. And then as these listings start appearing on the market, the only people I see driving around are Chinese people. They're coming with translators. And I'm thinking, this is kind of fishy. So I got the database of all of the transactions in Altadena, Malibu, Pacific Palisades, and the lists of purchases are dominated by Chinese names, about 30%. And then even beyond that, I'm seeing all these shell companies that you really can't figure out who owns them. So I started looking into it. I became apprised of your book. But help me understand from your perspective and your knowledge, what's probably going on here? How is that money entering the U.S.? Why are they buying real estate with it? They're cash purchases. I think the statistics are about 70% of them are cash purchases. Americans can't afford that. How is this happening?
Yeah, and again, that's upsetting. For every property, for every house that a Chinese foreign national is buying, for example, that's one less property or one less house that an American citizen is buying. So, and it's just very, very frustrating. So, once again, to answer your question, I try to go into some detail in the book, but very, very, very briefly, there's a couple things in play right now. Number one is you have all this criminality here in the United States going on, the proceeds of crime. So say, for example, you've got fentanyl sales, you've got drug money, or you've got human trafficking, or you've got illicit wildlife sales, whatever it is. In money laundering, the idea is to place it, layer it, and integrate. Those are the three stages or phases of money laundering. So I just want to give your listeners just a bit of the understanding of what's going on here. Criminals, they're motivated by greed. They want to spend that money, that illicit proceeds. So in order to do that, they try to place it into a financial institution, place it into a bank, a money service business of some sort. There's wide variety of ways they can do that. But the simplest one, and one that most people will understand, is to break it into smaller amounts and to structure it or smurf it or get a bunch of little mules together, couriers, and go around to different places and place it in smaller amounts into financial institutions where the deposits do not trigger financial intelligence reporting. For example, currency transaction reports or suspicious activity reports. After they get it placed, they try to layer it. They shift it from one bank to another, from one offshore to another, to a shell company without any beneficial ownership information. They'll use telephone apps and send it from here to there, whatever it is, making it very difficult for law enforcement to follow the money and value trails. And then finally, they integrate it back into the economy, right? They'll buy up the fancy cars and boats and airplanes, shopping centers, properties, invest in the stock market, whatever it is. They integrate it. Let me also mention one other thing, where the money supply comes from. In China, there's a growing middle class. And the middle class is very frustrated because the economy is not very strong right now. There's not a lot of investment vehicles open to them. Over the last 20, 30 years or so, it's been, let's invest in the local real estate market, the Chinese local real estate market. But that's collapsing. They get paltry returns if they just put it in, say, a savings account in China. And other investment vehicles just aren't very, very good. They're also nervous about the situation in China in general. So what they want to do, the individuals that can do it, that have the wherewithal to do it, they try to take some of their money and get it overseas. And this takes the form of what we call capital flight. Capital from China flowing out of China and going to places like the United States or going places like Europe, wherever, where the economy is strong, the dollar is strong, the euro is strong, et cetera, et cetera. I could complicate this and talk about the restrictions the Chinese government.
I was going to ask you, how do they get around that? Because they're not really supposed to transfer out more than $50,000.
Correct. That's correct. And if you read my book, I go into a lot of different ways that they do that, including underground banking systems, including Bai Chen or flying money systems, kind of like a Chinese Hawala system. There's other techniques, trade-based value transfers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of various techniques they use to get around that 50,000 limit. All right. So in other words, you've got a whole lot of Chinese demand for large quantities of US dollars. They want to get their Chinese yuan, their renminbi, out of the country in the form of dollars. And for example, real estate's perfect example. They need large amounts of dollars to purchase US properties. You see it yourself, multi-million-dollar properties. And then at the same time, you've got these illicit proceeds from various criminal things going on that the Chinese are involved with, or they're laundering for their cartels in the United States, or the marijuana farms that the Chinese are running in the United States, et cetera, et cetera. You have all this illicit proceeds where you've got this kind of mutual relationship wherein, for example, the cartels sell off to the Chinese money launderers their, illicit gotten gains, and then in turn you've got Chinese money laundering operatives in the United States that are selling access or selling the US dollars to Chinese citizens that are trying to evade China's currency control laws. So, I mean, it's just kind of like a win-win, if you will, for both of those sides. It's a loss-loss for us. It's a win-win for them. But you've got a lot of capital available, both licit and illicit, being invested into this real estate market. One of the problems, Luke, when you talk about capital flight, there's nothing wrong with capital leaving one country going to another country. But the problem is we have no idea what this capital originates from. Is it criminality in China? It could be. We don't ask the questions. Our real estate agents don't ask the questions. They're supposed to practice due diligence and know their customer, but they really don't care. They just want the commission. And when in law enforcement parlance, when you mix or commingle licit with illicit, everything is tainted. But we don't know because there's very, very few investigations into all of this.
It doesn't take a brain surgeon to just notice that something's going on here. And I was telling one of my friends about this, and I said, I use the analogy of you got a water leak in your house. You don't necessarily need to know exactly where the water's coming from to run outside and shut off the main. You don't start busting up the walls looking for all the little leaks. You go shut off the water, and then you can start to figure out, where the problem is. And I'm wondering, why aren't we doing that as a nation when we know that there's a lot of suspicious activity going on? Is it a danger to America for us to be allowing them to buy this real estate? Is it a danger to the U.S. to be allowing so many international students from China, allowing them to come here and study at places like UCLA? I mean, is this a real threat?
I believe it is for multiple reasons. First of all, there's a tremendous Chinese presence in the United States. I don't know all the numbers exactly, but for example, you mentioned students. There's roughly 300,000 Chinese students here in the United States. Roughly 100,000 plus Chinese of military age came across our open southern borders during the Biden administration. We have no idea who they are, what they're up to. You've got roughly 5 million Chinese Americans, the Chinese people here in the United States. And again, I want to emphasize my beef is not with the Chinese people. It's not with China. They have a wonderful history, wonderful culture, smart, whatever. I'm not bashing China. My beef is what I call CCP Inc., Chinese Communist Party Inc., and what they're doing. Buying real estate, buying, properties in Pacific Palisades, that's one thing. Buying properties near Air Force bases in the heartland of America, that's something else entirely. There's a lot of national attention focused on that. Congress is starting to finally wake up now, but a lot of this comes down to individual states. And some states are better than others. California is not so good. I've testified to Congress about 9 times on various things dealing with transnational crime, money laundering, even China, the Select Committee on China, discussing the fentanyl issue and whatnot. It pains me to say this, but I think there is a lot of Chinese influence in various organs of the United States government, let alone, our industry, let alone academia, let alone even pop culture, TikTok and all that kind of stuff. There is a lot of Chinese influence. They've got things like the Ministry of State Security operating here. You've got stuff like the United Front operating here. They're very good at influence operations. I used to be a spy. I know how this works. I know how you corrupt people. You look for vulnerabilities. And they're very, very, very good at what they do. And they pass out a lot of money. They're excellent at corruption. And they know how to corrupt people. And they're doing that here in the United States. A lot of people, a lot of politicians, federal, state, and local level, for whatever reason, and I'll leave it at that, just look the other way.
Yeah, and my concern, like you, my issue is not with the Chinese people writ large, but my concern are some of the impacts that will be had that aren't immediately apparent, especially when these properties are being bought with ill-gotten gains, like you said. That's a factor in our economy and how things work, how people buy and sell real estate. Certain people are priced out of the market while you have a lot of people buying what appears to be with cash purchases that maybe they haven't paid taxes on any of or the whole amount. So that's a concern. And then another concern of mine is it's our land. I mean, what do we have here in America as a form of secured wealth other than our land. We're not on the gold standard. We don't really have any real backing to our fiat currencies. We've got land. And one of the things that I've seen in the statistics about the Chinese who are purchasing the real estate, it's not the same type of a transaction as the typical American, where they might sell a property and buy another one. So you kind of have this 1-to-1 ratio when those properties are transferring. But what you see with the Chinese is they buy and hold, accumulate multiple properties, or they sell to other Chinese people. And so what you would see over a 20-year period, especially with the amount of real estate that they're buying here, is that these communities will start to change. They don't have a particularly long path to citizenship, especially if they can invest money and start to create jobs and business. And so I'm thinking, okay, what is this going to look like in 20 years when they own a ton of real estate, they've got more political pull, and you mentioned how good they are at influence in general. And I'm just wondering, how is this going to change our political landscape?
Well, there's something else that concerns me, and I'm trying to remember the name of this Chinese law. It's a national security law of 2017. I think it's Article 7. And basically that law says China, the Chinese government, the CCP, its organs, for example, their intelligence services, can go to any Chinese citizen, Chinese descent, in China, outside of China, United States. And they can go to them and say, you have to cooperate with us. You have to cooperate with the government, the CCP. You have to cooperate. If you don't cooperate with us, we'll make your life difficult for you here, for example, in the United States, but we'll particularly make your life difficult for your loved ones back home in the mainland, right? So think of the pressure that is applied. Think of the Chinese business people that succumb to this type of pressure, right? You will cooperate with us. You'll work with Chinese organized crime. You will launder the money for us. Same thing with the Chinese students, Chinese engineers. You will report on whatever thing we want you to do. They have really little choice in the matter. They have to cooperate.
You were saying it's literally on the scale of trillions of dollars and millions of Chinese here who we really don't know who they are. If you could speak just a little bit more about realtors. You just mentioned how they're either not compelled to or they don't report these transactions that look suspicious. Can you tell my audience how that works?
There's various forms of financial intelligence. It's part of the Bank Secrecy Act. Very, very briefly, about 1970, 71, Nixon declared war on drugs. And when he declared war on drugs, Congress started passing a series of laws, rules, regulations that basically gave federal agents, criminal investigators, the tools to follow the money trail, right? Which was actually ironic because it was the whole Watergate scandal when the term was coined, "follow the money." But anyway, the most important countermeasure we have for money laundering and threat finance and some of these financial crimes, what we call financial intelligence. So your audience knows that the currency transaction reports, you go into a bank, you deposit, withdraw $10,000 or more, they fill out a report. You travel in or out of the country. Are you transporting $10,000 more of cash or monetary instruments? You fill out a form. There's an IRS form 8300. Are you purchasing an expensive vehicle, an item of jewelry, or even property for cash over 10,000? You fill out a form. But the one that's most probably important, the one that's most useful for law enforcement, is called a suspicious activity report. This was established about 1996, and it's been growing now. Today, we have about, I think, something in the area of 4 million suspicious activity reports filed every year to Treasury's FinCEN, about 2 million filed by financial institutions, another 2 million filed by money service businesses. And all suspicious activity reports is that, for example, you go into a bank, Luke, say your bank is Wells Fargo Bank, and they know you. and they know your employer, and they know, your history of deposits and withdrawals, and they know what's normal for you. One day you come into Wells Fargo Bank, you carry a suitcase full of cash. Say you deposit about two or $300,000, and then you come in a couple days later and you wire it out to Dubai. All right, that's not normal. That's suspicious. That is going to trigger a report being filed, right? And that's exactly what it's a suspicious activity report. So, in addition to all the information about Luke, your name and your personal data and all this kind of stuff they have in file, some compliance officer in the bank is going to write up a nice little paragraph or an essay about why this activity is suspicious.
Yeah, how about this one? They show up at your three Chinese people show up at your property. Two of them don't speak English, and they're using a translator, and they want to buy your property. A lot of people said I'm a racist for saying. I said, no, I think that's a little suspicious.
It is suspicious, but this to answer your question is when 9/11 happened and they passed the USA Patriot Act, there were
Right.
some exemptions given out, right? And some of those exemptions had to do with who had the more powerful lobby in Washington, D.C., like attorneys and, accountants and real estate agents. So they were not forced to comply with traditional suspicious activity report. There's been a hue and cry, and things have started to change a little bit. And I am not up on the latest, but until very recently, real estate agents were exempt from reporting. Now, why is this suspicious? Using that example I just gave you, real estate agents, they know who is buying. You take people around from A to B to C to D and show them all these properties. You get to know them. You are the first line of defense, if you will, for money laundering. You are supposed to, quote unquote, know your customer. You are supposed to comply with the Bank Secrecy Act, and you should report, but they're not reporting because they're too concerned about their 6% commission. So they don't report. So it doesn't go into the databases. And as a result, a lot of this stuff never gets passed off to law enforcement, and things aren't investigated.
Yeah, and like I said, with the shell companies that I saw on the data sheet, I mean, I'm sure that's exactly how it goes on a lot of these. The realtors are getting to know the person. The person may not even speak English. Next thing you know, the transaction comes through in some innocuous, company that nobody's on the name of. It's all suspicious. I wanted to ask you, after reading your book, about some of your other assignments and things. You told me you worked with the Soviet Union. I mean, are you free to talk about what exactly your assignment was?
Not the Soviet Union. When I worked in the agency, it was against the Soviet Union in the Cold War. Okay. But I never worked, say, law enforcement cases vis-a-vis the Soviet Union.
So this was all during the Cold War. Okay.
During the Cold War, yeah.
I also read in your book, you said you worked in Rome. You also mentioned some of the stuff that was going on in Iraq and Afghanistan. When you were in Rome, was that having to do with the Italian mob? And if I'm not mistaken, was that around the same time that Giuliani was doing his thing in New York?
Yeah, roughly the same time. This was kind of the heyday. This was late 1980s, early 1990s. This is when we were really taking it to the mafia, the mob, fighting Italian American organized crime. And that's when I said at the outset, I was asked by the powers that be if I would head up the first truly U.S. Italian anti-money laundering task force. We called it Operation Primo Passo, or First Step in Italian, because at the time, the Italians, they didn't have an anti-money laundering law. They didn't have any financial intelligence. They really didn't know how to make financial cases per se. So we teamed up with them, and we were looking at dirty money going back and forth between Italy and the United States, and again, trying to develop targets for investigation both in the U.S. and in Italy. It was a lot of fun. It was groundbreaking work. You've probably heard about like Judge Falcone, the guy that was blown up by the mob outside of Palermo. I knew the judge. Worked with a lot of good Italian law enforcement people out there. This was during the time when they were, explosions in Rome, explosions here, explosions there. And I give all the credit to my Italian colleagues. They, in the Polizia Stato, Carabinieri, Guardia di Finanza, they all did great work. They got them on the run. I mean, they're still there. There's still a power, but it's not like it was, which brings me back in a weird sort of way to China. I almost get defensive when people say, "Oh, you're xenophobic," or you're China bashing, or you're this, you're that. That's not just not true. I'm Italian American, right? I investigated my own people, if you will. Italian mafia was considered a threat at the time, and we put a tremendous amount of resources into combating it. With the fall of the wall, it's Russian organized crime, and we could certainly look at them and talk about it. You talk about various gangs from Central America, MS-13, whatever. You talk about Jamaican organized crime. You talk about this organized crime. So if we can do all that, why can't we point out another threat? It's a Chinese threat. I don't know why people get upset about it. It's a fact of life. There are bad guys out there.
Yeah, I don't understand that either. I was reluctant to even talk about this subject when I started a few weeks ago, but I started talking about it and people are, oh yeah, I'm kind of thinking that too. I was just a little bit afraid to say it, maybe because this culture we have these days where everybody is just so quick to point the finger and call you a racist or a fascist if you don't agree with them.
I'm so glad you're doing this and, try to get the word out.
Now, you used to be here in California, right? And you moved away?
Yeah, I did. I grew up in Long Beach in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And at that time, California really was the Golden State. I mean, I had this, idyllic childhood. I'm blessed. I'm blessed. Wonderful family, beautiful neighborhood, stable environment. It was truly a special place. When I go back now to visit, I'm sorry, I can't wait to leave. It breaks my heart what's happened to the state.
Yeah, it can be pretty depressing at times, but there's some people out there they're fighting. I think Newsom's talking about running for president. I don't think he's got a chance after the disasters that have taken place here. It's just one mishap after another.
He may not know it, but the rest of the country's laughing at him.
Yeah, is there anything you can think of? Any final thoughts on the subject, specifically as it relates to Los Angeles and the real estate? Anything that you think would be helpful for people to know or understand?
This reminds me of some questions that I got, probably 5 years ago. I got a call from a radio talk show host in Vancouver, British Columbia, and they were very, very concerned. Kind of the same thing happening up there is happening in LA, about Chinese all over Victoria, Vancouver, buying up properties. They were using those properties to launder money, the proceeds of crime. A lot of this was via gaming junkets from Macau and illicit proceeds going into real estate, in other words. And the call in, I got on the air and I was talking to this guy, some of the guests, and it was like regular Canadian middle class people that were so upset because all this stuff was making the prices go up and they were priced out of their own market. They couldn't move up. We have called the American dream. Well, they have the Canadian dream. It's the same thing. You want to move up, you want to get a little better place, whatnot. And they were very, very frustrated. That kind of morphed into what was called the Cullen Commission. People can get online and look that up. I actually contributed to the commission's investigations and findings. They drilled down into this Chinese money laundering operation, the purchase of real estate, the gaming, the underground financial networks that I was talking about, the Fai Chen, the flying money, the trade-based value transfers that the Chinese are so good at. They wrote a very, very good report. They are starting to crack down on it right now. In my opinion, this is a kind of thing that has to happen in California and other areas. It's that there has to be a hue and cry from the people, the citizens, the Americans that say, this isn't right. This isn't fair. This isn't just. There's a lot going on here that we don't know about. Why are you not letting us know about it and demand change?
One other thing just came to my mind that I want to ask you before you go. The organ trade. It's just unfathomable to me. But I mean, what is the extent of the organ trade? Is that something that's happening mostly in China where people will go and, I guess you could call it black market medical tourism that's happening in China, or is that happening everywhere?
Yeah, what you're referring to for your listeners, when I went through the book, I was looking at these various specified unlawful activities. And some people say the illicit organ harvesting, the organ trade, if you will, is basically part and parcel of human trafficking. Call it what you will. Like the Uyghurs and whatnot, the political prisoners, the internment camps, if you will, that China has. There's been a lot of stories I wrote about, some of them in the book, about forced organ harvesting. It absolutely is sickening. It breaks your heart. Some of these organs are forcibly removed from people while they're still alive. You don't realize how cruel some people can be. To answer your question, organ harvesting is not unique to China, although they are the biggest practitioners of it. Huge problems in India and elsewhere. We even have some of it here in the United States, but it's not the forced organ harvesting that goes on there. The Chinese government, they deny all this, but there's been so many international investigations into this that it's not even it's not even a question. There's not even a debate anymore. It goes on. The CCP is responsible for the deaths of something like 65 million people, responsible for something like 400 million abortions over the last 50 years. It's responsible for I don't know how many millions of people during the COVID pandemic. The CCP is the most murderous organization in human history. Why don't people recognize that?
This is something that just perplexes me. And from your perspective, you mentioned that they have political influence, but I just saw the other day that Trump, it was either 600,000 or 900,000 students that he's going to allow. This is within this last week. Another 900,000 students. He's doing the tariffs and stuff, but he talks frequently about how he's got a very good relationship with Xi Jinping. I know that we're economically reliant on them because of a lot of the manufacturing that they do. We don't make anything of our own anymore. But aside from that, and with the extent of, like you said, the murder, the crime, everything else, why is it that we are trying to manage this relationship so much and that we're not condemning them, we're not investigating them? What do you think really is at the bottom of it?
China is an adversary of the United States, a very dangerous adversary of the United States. They have the largest standing army in the world, largest navy in the world, if you count all their huge fleets they have. Technologically very savvy. They got a lot of that technology from us. We gave it to them, or they stole it from us. They are an economic rival, a commercial rival, certainly a military rival, a diplomatic rival, an intelligence rival. They're dangerous. People talk about Russia, of course, nuclear power. But China, by far and away, is our largest threat. The powers that be make the calculation that it's better to talk than anything else. So I understand what he's doing.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily agree with everything he's doing. Right before we got on here, I just saw something. You mentioned that he was going to allow 600,000 Chinese students to come here. It's basically, if I understand correctly, there was just a statement out. No, that's not quite accurate. It's going to maintain at 300,000 a year, 600,000 over 2 years. So that's what I understand as a situation. I still don't think that's good, but anyway, it is what it is. It's a status quo.
Well, I think this was all really helpful, and I appreciate you taking the time. Do you have social media links or anything like that where people can find you?
Luke, I don't get on social media for good reason. I just
oh no, the intelligence officer says he stays off of social media.
I'm doing a class right now on e-commerce crime, and one of the modules is on social media abuse. No, I'm not getting on social media. I do have a website.
Okay.
johncassara.com. And if anybody wants to get a hold of me, they can get me a hold of me at john@johncassara.com.
Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. And I'm working through your books. I'm really enjoying them. So thank you very much.
Great. I thank you very much. Take care.
If you found this interview interesting and you'd like to learn more about what John calls CCP Inc., you can check out this book. It's called China Specified Unlawful Activities, that can be found on John's website. And while you're there, you can check out his other books on terror and terror finance. We are so grateful to have him. Thanks again, John.